So I'd go like this. And every now and then I catch myself doing something that my father does. And I'm like, fuck, don't do that.
Well, why not?
Well, I don't know, because I feel like I hate the idea that genes are destiny.
Mm-hmm.
And also, as I said, when my father was really doing this, he was,
Right.
like demented. So it was a substitute for speech. Like,
Right. This there was a period. When was this? Like a little less than a year ago, I guess, like a year to half a year ago, where this was kind of a recurrent feeling of mine. Most strikingly, like a particular instance that I remember that when it struck me was when I was in that remote village. So last summer I spent half of it in a remote Russian village, nothing around, and it was just me and my girlfriend and our dog. And she has this plot of land there with a tiny little house. And this was the first time in my life when I started thinking that this is a possibility, that you can buy land and you can build something there. And I remember standing, I couldn't sleep, and at 4 a.m. or something, I went outside, and it's, a summer night, the birds are singing, very quiet, and I had a cigarette, and I was looking at this land, just kind of thinking, not even think, like a mixture of thinking and feeling about the possibilities of this, not only of land, but also of life, just like me in my stage of life, wondering about the future possibilities of having a family, of having land, of figuring out like how my life is going to be settling and all that kind of stuff. And I realized this is probably something that happened exactly to my father when he was maybe a little older than me, except that, there was less opportunity and less money and, things like that. And my family has, let me calculate this. What again is the unit of measure that you guys use to measure land? Acres or something?
Acres, yeah.
So, I'm using Google too. So we have like a quarter of an acre.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, small thing. And my family got it from the state on the same year as I was born. And it was this, like, I remember my childhood when I was 5 or something. We would go there, and it's this just kind of land that there's nothing on there. There's a little, what looks like a train car that they managed to find somewhere and get to that piece of land. And that was considered incredible luck, that they found this like tiny, crummy little thing with a roof and a tiny little stove inside. And that was like, instead of a house, we had that. And, but it must have been, I'm pretty sure there has to have been that moment where my father is standing on that piece of land and having a cigarette and looking at it and thinking, God damn it, I found myself that train car. I'm going to figure out a way to drag it here. And I'm going to build a life here. And it's like that kind of feeling would every once in a while re-emerge and of this repetition. And it is somehow, for me, it's like bittersweet. It's not, I find both comfort and sort of, I don't know, concern or, something sad about it. And the sad thing about it is the feeling of maybe feeling trapped, like we're just in this loop. I'm the same thing as my father, and he was the same thing as either his father or grandfather or something. And it's just like generation after generation, we're on this loop. But at the same time, there's something there's something good about that feeling, because I feel like I'm a part of a bigger thing, and I'm doing my part. I have an iteration to be responsible for.
Yeah.
And my father did a pretty good job. And looking around, I'm thinking, this is okay. I'm not failing. And I'm carrying this one step further. And maybe not even a step further. This is like relates to our conversation about progress and stuff. Maybe not even, maybe there's just like an eternal story that keeps happening. And I feel like I'm playing my part of that story. And there's something beautiful about the repetition as well as the kind of sad part about the story not changing a whole lot.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, I guess I also take comfort. Listen, I have kids, and even though I didn't really want kids before I had them, I didn't not want them. I just was kind of indifferent to the idea of having children. But now that I have them, I do feel like I'm a little bit more a part of the human race.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I feel and part of the circle of life. It evokes those kind of sentimental feelings in me.
Right.
But at the same time, I find myself, you know, a lot of my thoughts and writing about my own life and about life in general, I keep getting stuck on the notion of repetitions and cycles, and I have a kind of horror of them. And so when I think of myself as repeating certain things that my father did, or even, you know, I suddenly recognize some of my gestures as being like my father's. My girlfriend, who met my father before he died, is constantly pointing out, oh my God, what you just said or what you just did is just like something your father would have done. And sometimes she means it fondly, and sometimes she means it very critically. And I'm always like, you know, I try to argue against her,
Mm-hmm.
Which is absurd. So, yeah, I don't, you know, it's funny. I was just talking with my students yesterday. I asked them to write a little in-class essay. What's your utopia? I like that. This is something that I've been asking my students for a while. I ask a lot of the intellectual types that I interview. When I do Q&As with them, my last question is always, what's your utopia? And one girl actually said, I want to stop being busy and always thinking I need to do something in life.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, yeah, okay, that's interesting, because that supposedly is the goal of Buddhism and Hinduism, that, you know, we're on the circle of death and rebirth over and over again. We live our lives, but supposedly there is a way to escape the cycle and reach some kind of transcendent, timeless state, nirvana, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. And I said, I you know, part of me yearns for that and doesn't want to be busy and on the treadmill all the time. But part of me also has a horror of achieving some kind of state of timelessness and a disconnection from life. I mean, what would it be really? And you know, and we've talked about this too. I mean, I feel like God's not happy being in nirvana. God gets, I don't know, bored or anxious or something. And that's where the world comes from. God creates out of it. God needs to be busy to distract himself. And I think all these feelings sort of, you know, the metaphysics of it and the theology of it, and also the kind of everyday feeling of being a biological creature on this treadmill, you know, but then gradually headed toward death.
Right.
You know, they evoke all these mixed feelings in me.
I have a few very different directions in which I can take this in. Let me just share an anecdote. It's very tangentially related, but I think there is an opportunity to plug this in. Just yesterday, I think the Navalny's people put out a new video. Their signature thing is they make these, they use a drone to fly over like Putin's friends' mansions and stuff. And they show this is the luxury that these people live in while the country is in shambles. And so they published one more about one of Putin's residences. So he has a bunch, he has like 4, and one of them is, does not show up on TV, right? So in this one, he meets people. In this one, you can see him doing this. But this 4th one is not publicly present in the media. And so they flew over and they found the blueprints for the thing. And the angle they're taking there is the media portrays Putin as this ascetic, not sure how to pronounce that word, person. Ascetic. Like he doesn't need luxury. He just loves Russia and nature and people, and he doesn't need any of this fancy stuff. And they're showing that he has this multiple stories building that's a spa center, just all kinds of different spa things. And, they're making fun of that. They're saying this is clearly not our idea of what asceticism is. But one of the things that he has there is a flotation tank. The thing that John Lilly invented, the isolation chamber, the sensory deprivation tank.
Right.
And he also has a church on the same premises. And that made me feel like you're not supposed. This is my, my lens of looking through which I'm looking at the world, which I want it to be a weird story. And John Lilly, who invented the tank, researched the intelligence of dolphins for a while secretly experimenting with LSD, then graduation to ketamine, and eventually the tank plus ketamine was his way of getting in touch with alien intelligences coming from outer space. People like Joe Rogan talks a lot about how he likes to mix the tank with edible marijuana and has other kinds of weird hallucinatory experiences. But even without the substances, still you're in a dark space. You're floating on the surface of water. The temperature is the same as the temperature of your body, and it's quiet. And so what that does is, after a certain time, you're not feeling your body anymore. Your intelligence that is not embodied. You don't feel like you have form. And I like that idea that Putin is floating in that thing in his residence and feeling like he's a consciousness that's not located anywhere in particular. Here's not this body. And that gives him the right kind of perspective to maintain the going-ons and to stay in power, because then he's calm and then he looks at all of this business kind of from afar, and nothing can, freak him out or something. And then there's also the dolphin connection. There are pictures of Putin with dolphins, playing in the Black Sea. I have this theory that the whole Crimea situation was all about dolphins, because apparently only US and Russia has dolphins in the military. I saw today that Iran has some as well, because Ukraine somehow transported some of their dolphins to Iran. But the dolphins, this was a Soviet program, and the dolphins were in Crimea, and then Crimea became a part of Ukraine. And so Ukraine for a while had that dolphin program, and then Russia, and next Crimea, and now we have the dolphins. And so all of that, pieces of the mosaic that if you spend a little more time on this, you could come up with a weird sci-fi comic book or something based on tangentially on real events.
Well, I love the idea of Putin in a sensory deprivation tank. I might have told you, when I lived in Denver in the late 1970s, and sensory deprivation tanks there was a company that actually opened up all these sensory deprivation parlors around Denver, and you'd pay like, I don't know, 25 or 30 bucks, and you'd go and lie in one for an hour or as long as you liked. And so I tried it because I'd heard about them. And I can't remember if I smoked pot or had taken some mushrooms or whatever, but I was high, and I went in this thing, and at the time I was taking, this is before I became a Scientific American skeptic. I was still just a hippie, and my girlfriend and I were taking a course called You and Me and ESP, and from like this professional charlatan psychic. I mean, the guy was too much. He wore these powder blue leisure suits, and he talked like this, and he was like a used car salesman from Oklahoma. But he was telling us that he was a psychiatrist to ghosts and all this crazy stuff. And he gave us exercises for homework. This is an adult ed class, big auditorium in a community college at night. That's where we met. And one of his assignments was get in touch with your spirit other. We all have a spirit other. Some people call them guardian angels, whatever, but it's out there. And so I got in the sensory deprivation tank, and I thought, oh, okay, now this is a good time for me to get in touch with my spirit other. And I was in this kind of, jokey, ironic mood. And I'm lying there, and it's amazing how quickly you do become disembodied. I felt like I was in infinite space, like I was floating out in the universe, but there were no stars, nothing, just infinite blackness surrounding me. And I'm getting into that, and I'm thinking, okay, ready for you now, my spirit other. And then all of a sudden, I felt like the spirit, I felt like something was coming at me. I felt like something was approaching me from the void at an extremely high velocity. And I totally flipped out. And these things are like giant coffins. And I threw open the lid of this giant coffin and jumped out. Of course, I'm totally naked. And I'm like, whoa, just like freaking out. And I was, and then I should have gotten back in and tried, because as soon as I got out, I thought, oh my God, you're such a coward, Jesus Christ. And then, but I couldn't get back in. I was too rattled. And that's the only time I ever was in a sensory deprivation tank. But what I like about the idea of Putin in one is like Putin having these metaphysical experiences or spiritual experiences. It's funny to think of these very powerful political figures, especially ones that are kind of bullies like Putin and Donald Trump. Do they look into the abyss? And if so, what is their experience of the abyss? And how does that affect the way they think about themselves as powerful men in the world, making other people bend to their will? I am such a hippie wimp that it's impossible for me to imagine what goes on in the mind of somebody like that. But I'm really intrigued by it.
Putin specifically, I think, is a good character. Again, this is the reason he's a good character to project all these things on him is he is a character. We don't know the real person.
Yeah.
What we have is these representations in the media, the plays he does with words. He's clearly, you can, if you look at things he said over years, he said everything. There's not a position. He's not an ideologue. He doesn't have a coherent, here's what I'm for, here's what I'm against. He changes those things depending on the situation. And he does it with this there is this calm about this. There is this detachment about him that makes it easy to imagine him as the person who is very comfortable with the void, as a person who is like, this is his home. He's a spatial agent of a state that doesn't exist anymore. I forget if he even was in Russia when the Soviet Union collapsed, because right before then, he was, he spent some years in Germany as, the KGB Stasi guy there. And so, and he does all these like, he plays with a tiger, or he flies a pack of cranes, or he like finds an ancient vase. All of these like PR appearances that he also does with a little bit of a, like, this is what I have to do right now. It's just this theater that he's engaged in, that he probably doesn't come up with this shit himself. There's like various teams change. He's been in power for 21 years. So a bunch of management types, PR types have joined the team and then left. And so the image of Putin changes depending on who's in charge of him. So he is almost this like tulpa character, not an actual human being, but a hologramic figure that is redone every once in a while depending on the situation. And so like with all of this theater on the outside, both internally in Russia, and then the geopolitics of him saying something about either Trump or Biden, and then there's actual war happening. And in the middle of that, or the figure that we place in the middle of all of that dynamic, to imagine that figure laying in the deprivation tank, just like closing his eyes and, dissolving into awareness itself. That's a funny and interesting picture to me, to think that he like steps away from the business of it all and is like, this is all pay. And, I'm going to get out of this thing in a couple of hours and then do whatever is needed to be done.
I wonder if he is what Nietzsche would call the Superman, so somebody who lives like he's a true existentialist. He realizes that life is meaningless, so he is comfortable with the abyss. And he has the power of life and death over people, and so he's comfortable with that sort of moral abyss, and it's enabled him to be this kind of Superman who's transcended good and evil, and is just living. Like projecting like crazy, but maybe he actually is a mystic, which means that he realizes that all this is meaningless. It's just a game. So have an adventure, right? Have the best adventure that you can. And the best adventure for lots of men is to exert power over other people and treat the whole world like your own chessboard, and you're just moving the pieces around. There's some other powerful people out there who thwart you, but still you can go far toward doing exactly what you want to do. I just have to throw in something here. I was this is related to the show I just saw. I just saw a PBS documentary on Ernest Hemingway. Mm-hmm. And I can't really recommend it because it's kind of depressing. Mm-hmm. This guy was a tormented person, and he wasn't really that nice a person, especially in the latter part of his career. But he exemplified and helped to perpetuate and kind of market this certain idea of, like the manly existentialist. Confronting his fears over and over again. And that way of living, like being a man, and and, killing things. He killed a lot of things, Ernest Hemingway. He killed a lot of animals, and, he loved bullfights. And he also, I'd never known this, he was a war correspondent in World War II, and he ended up breaking the rules of the Genevan Convention. He was armed and killed as many Germans as he could. And apparently he did kill quite a few. And that was great. That made the war even more fun for him.
Right.
Although at the same time he was traumatized by it.
Right.
And then, so it's the whole idea of life as a competition with winners and losers, and writing, intellectual life, also as a competition. Hemingway was incredibly competitive with other writers, and when he became famous, he was very cruel to other up-and-coming male writers. And it just, I'm fortunate that I was kind of the post-Hemingway generation, sort of, growing up in the 60s, and we sort of disdained that kind of masculinity. But it's, watching the show, I still had to recognize that there's elements of that in me.
Oh,
and
for
it was
sure.
Very, it was very disturbing to me. Winners and losers, and life as a competition. I think the reason Hemingway is still so sort of compelling to us, even though he repulses us, is that for men at least, and I think for a lot of women too, that his ideas about how to live life were kind of hard to resist.
Yeah, these images of masculinity and how they change. This is an interesting topic. I recently saw a tweet, a tweet thread by this woman. One of the more interesting profiles that I follow on Twitter is this girl who, I don't know a whole lot about her, but she's from borderline culty family, like a very Orthodox Christian family. And she, I don't know when, as a teenager, or I don't know when, escaped that and started to try to figure out what she's for herself. And that led her to a lot of psychedelic drugs and porn. And she, for a while, she was doing porn, and now she's this mixture of, I think she has still some kind of a, not full-blown porn, but some kind of selling videos of herself doing something erotic online, while also occupying this weird intellectual space of really challenging everything, asking questions about everything, and sort of just in a very intellectual way, detached kind of way, trying to ask awkward, confusing questions. She has a board game that I think is called Ask Hole, which is it's just a deck of cards with questions that I think she tested them as polls. She does polls on Twitter sometimes, and when a question is really divisive, you get two answer choices and it splits evenly, that's a good indication that this question may go into that kind of game. The game is designed to, if you're with a group of friends and you all answer this question honestly, you're going to have a complicated conversation after answering the question, because the two positions that the question proposes are very incompatible. You're going to think your friends are morally reprehensible people, and then you have to hash it out. And so she posted recently, and she's into this polyamory thing, no one sexual partner. And she posted this thread about how what masculinity is to her has changed over her life, like what attracts her in men has changed. And the specific example that she gives is, she says, there was a time when if a man has exhibited any kind of feminine traits, that would be a complete turnoff. I wanted men to be strong and confident and, like Hemingway type. And then she got with some crowd that she didn't used to hang out with, which was different. And she realized that in that crowd, the signaling that happens is sort of reversed. If a man wears a skirt or has long hair, that is a signaling of his masculinity, not femininity, because he's so confident in himself that he doesn't need to worry about how other people are going to perceive them. Mm-hmm. And then her like actual physical sexual attraction rules changed, where it used to be this would be a complete turn off. This is a wimp. I don't want to do anything with that kind of guy. Suddenly that became a turn on, because even though the signal itself, the way it's represented is the exact opposite, what is being signaled is still the same. It's I'm confident, I can do what I want, I don't care what other people think, you're not gonna make me feel insecure, and so forth. And I was thinking, I forget when this was, but recently I had this thought about, so my father died, must have been 15 years ago. Well, a little less than that, 13 or something. And so my image of my father is, it's not a person that I've met yesterday, right? It's a memory of a memory. And I was thinking about what I learned from him and what I internalized, what kind of value I've gotten out of the relationship. And though that definitely are a lot of things, I'm definitely was shaped by him very much, and I attribute a lot of my good qualities to his upbringing, or him bringing me up. But the thing that I had to work through, some years after his death, and kind of learn for myself and figure out on my own is, it's like working with a negative example. He was very much this he was a very kind, very sweet man, but he was this stoic person. Life is difficult, and I'm gonna keep all of my troubles within me, and I'm gonna get through it, and maintain this modicum of everything's fine, and we're just gonna have to go deal with it. And that led him to be silent about the whatever was troubling him. And for most of my life, I saw that as strength. I saw that this is what a strong person does. And then in the last 5 years or so, I have been working through that and getting on the other end of this, that this is more of a weakness than a strength, because a strong person can be vulnerable. A strong person can share the difficult things they're going through and not hide them within themselves.
Yeah. It's interesting that we're, one way or another, we have to deal with the legacy of our fathers, and even with, I think men my age are still dealing with the legacy of Ernest Hemingway. I can remember, so Hemingway obviously influenced a lot of other writers, and one is Norman Mailer. Norman Mailer fought in World War II. Norman Mailer, he was he just died, I don't know, not that long ago, but he was a very prominent novelist who also fought in World War II as a very young man, and then embraced the Hemingway values of life as a competition, and love and sex as a battle between men and women. And Mailer wrote a novel called An American Dream, and it was like kind of an acid trip version of an Ernest Hemingway book, where the narrator is this kind of John F. Kennedy type figure, this charismatic guy, and he's got a beautiful, sexy but bitchy wife, and they have a big fight after a party when he's drunk, and he throws her out the window of their high-rise apartment. So he kills her, and then he goes and anally rapes the maid who's down the hall, and then the cops come, and he outwits the cops, and then in the course of the novel, he also he like beats up a big tough black guy, and he steals the girlfriend from an Italian mobster. So the novel is like this crazy parody of male fantasy in the Hemingway-esque mode. Like, what do you most fear and what do you most desire? Okay, now you're gonna do that. You're gonna conquer your fears and just take what you desire, even if other men want it, if other men possess it. And it was just, I read this back in the 70s, and I remember just thinking, this is so nuts. It's like, who would actually want to live like this? And it's just so absurd. And it wasn't clear from the way Hemingway actually did stab one of his wives. I mean, Norman Mailer actually stabbed one of his wives in a drunken when they were having a drunken fight, and he boxed and had this kind of belligerent attitude toward life. Saw it very much as a contest, and he was just ridiculous. I mean, he was a brilliant writer, a brilliant thinker, but he was this ridiculous cartoon version of a man. And I sort of saw Mailer's work as an inadvertent repudiation of Hemingway. But as I said, these values are, you can sort of rationally distance yourself from them. That's what I've tried to do. But then you feel them inside you. They're very deep rooted. Hemingway, he blew his brains out when he was only 61 years old because he couldn't play the game anymore. I mean, he was clinically depressed. He was a mess.
Didn't he also have, like, he used to wear women underwear behind closed doors?
He was kinky. It turned out, so there was a lot of kind of cheap psychoanalysis in this documentary. Apparently his mother, he had a sister who I think was very close in age to him. I don't think she was a twin, but very close in age. And the mother used to dress them up both as twins, as if they were same-sex twins. So sometimes they would both be dressed as little boys. Sometimes they would both be dressed as little girls. And apparently Hemingway had this thing for like gender switching in sex that especially came out with his last wife, who was apparently into that. So that sort of complicates the image that we have of him. Although you could also see it as an expression of his confidence in his masculinity, right?
I suppose so. But there does seem to be I guess the one of the guiding principles that I'm using with my life is you want to integrate all of the different parts of yourself. You don't want there to be contradictions between what you feel and what you say, what you feel and what you do, how you are behind closed doors and how you are in the open, how you deal with strangers, how you deal with people who... Девушка, что такое? My dog has been sick and he's having, like, he has a problem with his prostate and his bladder and his kidneys and just an overall fucked up little creature. But right now he's not it doesn't seem like he's What did it? Yeah, I think he's just asking where my girlfriend is because she comes home at about this time, and right now she's the birthday party. Anyway, you want to integrate all of these things. You want to be a whole human being as opposed to a bunch of disparate, vectors pulling in different directions. And there's strength in that, in knowing that there's no contradiction between all of the different parts of your psyche and your being, and you're moving in some direction that, is consistent throughout. And Hemingway, not only Hemingway, but like that image of masculinity, I think is a failure to do that. It's like you're this masculine man here, very strong and confident and dealing with everything that life throws at you, and then you blow your brains out because apparently you weren't dealing with it very well. There was something that going on inside that these contradictions that you couldn't resolve in the final instance.
Yeah.
With Putin, there is also, coming back to this image of him as a Superman, or as a person who's faced the void. Another way to think about it, and again, this is all obviously projections, and again, though this is part of why he's interesting, because he is like a blank space. He is, a character, or even a sequence of characters that change each other based on what seems to be, whatever character is better to play at this particular moment in order to stay in power is the kind of character that he's going to play, it seems like. But there is, with all of that, my feeling about him is, even if you build him up as this, more than just a thug, more than just a bully, and you come up with this metaphysics for him and you turn him into a more interesting and deep character, there's a tastelessness that comes with all of that. It's like when you look at these mentions, they're not if everything is relative and you face that and you've realized that there's no good and evil, and you're able to decide what your values are for yourself and build your life based on that, etc. You need some kind of artistic vision or integrity to create that reality in a way that would be worthwhile, interesting, or compelling. And his, what he builds, these mansions, or his lifestyle does not strike me as well, here's a person who's transcended all of that, and now he's able to do something outside of the confines of the culture. No, he's playing out these stereotypes of a rich guy, of a powerful guy, of a guy who's everybody bends their knee in front of him. And that, one way to look at that is to see him as an expression of this tragedy, really, of the Soviet people that was expressed to me most in the most stark fashion that stuck with me. There was this TV show in the, I guess, mid-90s that I used to watch political shows with my mother and father. This is good family evening time. They're watching something that they actually care about, and I'm using that as a way to just chill with my parents as a little kid. And I don't remember that show myself, but my mother referenced it a number of times, where, well, I guess there are two different shows, two different things that different people said. One was, I forget the name of this woman. She was in Gorbachev's government. I forget what position she occupied, but she said that one of the tragedies of the Soviet period, personal kind of tragedies for her, is she said, I'm by now, let's say like 50 or 60 years or whatever, and I have no idea what my taste is. I don't know what I like because I was never able to find that out because there were no options. I just had the same kind of furniture that everybody else had. We lived in the same kind of apartment that everybody else lived. And so now I'm at the latter stage of my life and I still don't know what I like. And then the other thing was, so this was like mid-90s, and a teacher was complaining about the, economic hardships and how much work she has and how little opportunity she has because of money. And she said, I'm a teacher. I have, these kids come to me to be, like, I'm supposed to be an example for them. I'm supposed to enrich their lives. And it really is a part of, it should be a part of my job to have a rich life outside of that job. I should go to theater plays. I should, get more, culturally educated myself so that when I go into the classroom, these kids see a human being that's continuing to develop and who has interests and whatnot. And I don't have an opportunity to have these interests or pursue them. And so that's another way to see Putin as this, he used to, in the KGB before, all of this stuff happened to him, he apparently had a nickname Moth because he was this nobody. He was this gray character who, no distinct characteristics about him, just the guy in the background. And maybe that's one way to get ahead in life is to have, not a whole lot of personality and just do what the situation calls for and quietly plan your way to the top. But then once you get to the top, what are you going to do with that since you haven't developed a personality? You're going to play out these cliches of a person on the top. And so that's another way to kind of paint that drama of, maybe he's figured out many of these things about the social dynamics and how you play the game, but then you win the game in a local setting. And what do you do with your position, your ability to have everything in the world? You don't have taste. You don't have interests that are deep. And so you're just, again, playing out these stereotypes.
It does seem like a lot of the, really powerful men have sort of adolescent taste. And although I'm sure, if you went through history, you could find some who, well, maybe they surround themselves with people who have taste, or they're that's their job is to decorate the dictatorship. So Hitler certainly, he had taste.
Right, he was a talented person. That swastika flag that he came up with, that was a powerful image.
Oh, really? Hitler himself designed the swastika?
I think so. I think at least I did see there was an illustration in some book that this is the flag as he drew it before it became the thing. I think the swastika in a circle and the red background, I think that was his idea.
And then, you look at some of the Lenny, what's her name? Werthmuller? Jesus, I can't remember her name. The Nazi documentary filmmaker.
Oh, Leni Riefenstahl.
Yeah, Leni Riefenstahl. She had superb taste, but in the service, it was taste again beyond good and evil. I mean, I've never thought that art should be, art is often degraded by its commitment to a certain set of moral values. On the other hand, you see art like Triumph of the Will, and which is in the service of this horrendous, vicious regime, and clearly that's not the answer, right? So yeah, I don't know. I assume if you went back, you found some, let's say, great Japanese warlords or something,
Right, right.
who were absolutely ruthless in the way that they wielded power, but they probably had superb Zen inspired taste, right? In a sense, like, I don't know, who cares? What the taste is if you're the life that you're living um, has absolutely no moral substance to it at all. So you make your palace pretty, and
Yeah.
meanwhile, you're slaughtering the population out there. Yeah, I mean, in a way, we're sort of talking about what if you have a truly existential, and by existential I mean you sort of face the meaninglessness of existence squarely, and you've really internalized it, and you have developed a fearlessness. You know you're going to die. That's okay, and you're going to make the most out of life, and try to cultivate this fearless attitude. And what should your aesthetics be if you're that kind of person? Do aesthetics even matter?
And is there any connection between the aesthetics and the morals?
Yeah, I mean, maybe at that point, it's really the aesthetics is just so incidental to the raw manipulation of other people, that it ends up being like, sometimes it looks tasteful, and other times it's like Saddam Hussein's version of interior decorating, right?
I had this. A few shows ago, we talked about this idea, this premise of mine, of ideas as living entities that you can form relationships with. And for a few weeks, I was really focusing on that idea and thinking about it, and seeing it as a seed of something that could even be a true description of reality, of what is happening. The latest DMT trip made me forget about all of that, because the experience made me, I was like thinking about it in the background before, and then in between the two little trips, I thought about this idea again and thought, okay, well, this is clearly not even close to a description of what actually is happening. But in the same instance, I thought that does not mean you should abandon the idea, because what actually is happening, you're probably not going to be able to describe anyway. You don't even understand it. And the idea can still have value and worth, even if it's, a metaphor at best. What should be the measure of that idea is whether it's useful, whether it, allows you to do something good more effectively or not. But at this earlier stage, when I was trying to think it through and maybe figure out some of its consequences, I wrote this draft of trying to think the idea through more fully. And I thought a good exercise would be so one of the things that I do generally when I work with ideas, if I have some idea that I haven't yet articulated, and I drew something maybe based on it, but it's not getting there, it's not I can't finalize it, can't bring it to some kind of a completion so that I can share it with others, is I switch the medium. I think, so I try to draw this. What happens if I instead write a story? If I find different way of expressing this idea, what if I put it on a blackboard? What if I put it on a bulletin board? What if I, what would this idea be like if it was expressed as sculpture or painting or, whatever it is? Or if I talk to this person or to that person. And so that allows you to understand the idea more fully. You see it like another projection of the object that you're trying to see on a different plane. And so with that idea of ideas as living entities, I thought I'm going to do this exercise of imagining what it would be like if there was a religion based on that premise. And the reason I thought of a religion, because religion it has all of these different elements, right? There is, if you think about Christianity, there is like an architectural style that goes with it. There is the social structure. There is a way of speaking. There is all of these different dimensions of this multidimensional process going on. And so if you think about some kind of an idea and imagine what a religion based on it would look like, you'll learn more about the idea. And so I started like writing these things out. So here's how the symbol of the religion might look like. Here's how a sacred place might look like. It would be some kind of a portal for these ideas, some kind of a thing that plays with multiple tools of creative work so that you can channel the ideas through, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then I got to the morality of that imagined religion, like what would be its values, how would it determine what's good and what's bad. And at first I thought there's no correlation there. Like that premise, maybe ideas are alive and there are these invisible entities that you can engage with. It's morally ambiguous. There is no compass to navigate the good and evil part of life. But then I started writing out like what kind of guidance could that framework give you. And the guidance I thought would be like how to engage with ideas. It's like closer to creative techniques, right? So how do you have more ideas and how do you have better ideas and how do you not engage with ideas that would be harmful to you or to others? And writing that out through this kind of communication framework, like how do you have a good relationship with an idea and how do you find the ideas that would be good to you, led me to a kind of morality based on this premise. So I wrote out these like principles for engaging with ideas. And then like the next step is to think these same rules, extrapolate them and turn them into these foundational principles of engagement in the world generally. And the way you get to good ideas and the way you establish good, healthy relationships with these ideas for just the purpose of, having better art without sacrificing yourself, leads you to a set of principles for engagement with people. It's the same kind of relationship. You don't want to abuse the idea. You don't want the idea to abuse you. You want to pay attention to the idea if you are to express it better. You want to be curious. You don't want to be judgmental, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All based on this practical aspect of how do you empower yourself as a creative person that can be translated to the way you engage with people and the world, and it can become this basis for a morality.
Wow, that's really interesting. As you're speaking, I'm just thinking of that you can connect. You could come up with sort of a value system based on the realm of ideas that would. I mean, one of the axioms would be that ideas are good if they generate other ideas, right? Mm-hmm. So you could think of that as being fertility or something. Mm-hmm. The more ideas, the better. And some ideas shut down other ideas. It's kind of a paradox of science that the ultimate scientists are always seeking some kind of ultimate truth that answers the questions of that field and that kind of closes that field off, in some sense, to further investigations and to new ideas. If your idea is fantastic, you've got a perfect explanation of photosynthesis, then that sort of closes down further ideas about that puzzle. But so the whole idea of scientific truth, truth with a capital T, that serves as a kind of final theory for any field, that's not a good idea. Because it's sort of a dead end.
Right.
And then,
right. Then the conversation has to be over. And
yeah, a certain kind of conversation. You could say, well, then, a lot of scientists would say, well, but once we have an understanding of how nature works, that's like learning the rules of chess. And then, we become grandmasters. We can manipulate nature. And that's what we're already starting to do. I get that. But it seems to me that, I'm more, I feel like this is a way of expressing what's sometimes called pluralism. And the idea of pluralism is just that it's good to have lots of theories, a diversity of theories. The more, the better. And we should resist the idea that there is a correct way of understanding some feature of nature, and especially understanding like really big things like nature as a whole or human nature. Anyway, I'm just trying to say, yeah, that's far out. I really like that. I like the idea of sort of thinking about ideas as like a separate realm, as sort of disconnected from us, but then trying to understand how, if you develop a set of values for that realm, what that implies for how we live our lives and how we relate.
Doesn't have to be disconnected. The way that I've been thinking about it is like it's a, I don't know, hidden mirror world, like what is happening, like the old alchemical thing, the as above, so below. Like what's happening here in our world is what is also happening in that realm of ideas, and the two realities reflect one another. And what you said just now about ideas, like a good idea is one that gives birth to more ideas or empowers other ideas, or doesn't shut down other ideas. That's also a reasonable way to look at your way of navigating the social reality. You're a good node in a network of human relationships if all of the people that are connected to you get stronger and healthier and happier, and you don't shut them down. Also, applies for conversation. If you're talking to a person, like sometimes you start talking to somebody and you start on an idea and they just go, "Oh, that's bullshit," and there's not even that's bullshit because, and then let's argue. It's just like, well, that branch of the conversation is now sewn off, and I don't have anything to propose in its place, and so let's just be in awkward silence now.
The thing is, I do think, I mean, listen, I'm a critic of other people's ideas all the time, and I've had conversations about being a kind of intellectual critic with other people who've said, they try to just be positive about other people's ideas. And I remember I was having a conversation. In fact, I repeated this in my book, Pay Attention. I was having a conversation with a colleague at Stevens, and he was going on a big riff about the importance of open-mindedness, and he concluded it very triumphantly by saying, there are no bad ideas. And I looked at him and I said, that is a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like one of the few times in my life where I had a like a
Zinger.
witty reply
Yeah.
to somebody, and I said it in the moment instead of thinking of it later. That's why I repeated it in my book. And there are bad ideas. I mean, like the
Sure.
Nazism, fascism
Sure.
is a bad idea. I think young Earth creationism. Even though fascism has provoked a lot of commentary and has been very stimulating for the history of ideas to understand fascism and why it's wrong, why it represents this horrible expression of human nature. So I guess in that sense, you could say that the Nazis are very much with us. We need them almost as this cultural embodiment of a certain kind of wrong-headedness in human history. But I still do think there are bad ideas.
No, I agree with that. I think the question is, how do you engage with ideas that you think are bad?
Yeah.
How do you, and again, this can be applied to the human interactions as well. From talking about the way people see the world, if you just think somebody's wrong or has a warped view of reality, to actually engaging with the person you think is, creating more evil in the world and harming people. How do you engage in a way to diminish that harm, as opposed to, just saying you're evil? And there's not a lot of value in just proclaiming that something is bad and then not finding a way to resolve the tension.
I have tried to be less critical, but I've had conversations with certain Buddhists. I think I've even had this conversation with Bob Wright, the maestro behind these podcasts, and Bob, I think, was trying to practice right speech, this Buddhist rule or guideline in which you just try not to speak ill of others. And I'm like looking at Bob and thinking, are you kidding me? You can't do that. I'd like to see you try. And I know I can't do it. Maybe it's an ideal. I have tried to be nicer, even to people I disagree with and don't like as I get older. I'm not sure if that's ideological or moral. It's just like the older I get, the more I don't like being angry. It makes me feel bad. And so I just like let things slide rather than dwelling on them if they piss me off now. So I'm sort of headed toward right speech, but not intentionally. Hey, it's like,
right.
Yes, my time to turn into a pumpkin and go get my lunch.
Sounds good. I was thinking about this conversation, the idea that I had that I just didn't prepare, so I didn't try. But I want to, at some point, maybe in the next conversation, to just ask you about your life trajectory. Because in these conversations, every once in a while you say, and then I went to this place and spent some time there, or like I spent 5 years painting houses for a living. And I never ask a follow-up, like what was that about and when that happened and how all of these periods, form a sequence. And I'd like to have that conversation, just learn about your life a little more.
Sure. I'll tell you about the time I spent living in a tent in a mangrove swamp down in the Florida Keys, taking LSD and running through the swamp, pushing spider webs away from my face.
Yes, that's the conversation I want to have.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be fun. I'd be happy to do that.
All right, perfect. So then in 2 weeks, that's what's going to happen.
All right, sounds good. Okay, now how should I'm not, how do I hang up again? What am I supposed to do?